Morning everybody, and welcome to this morning's assembly. So as you'll be aware, intellectual characteristic that we're dealing with this half term is self-assurance. Of course, that was a characteristic chosen by you. And when talking of self-assurance, I was reminded of the saying, if you believe you can, you probably will. If you believe you can't, you definitely won't. And belief is the ignition switch that gets you off that launching pad. Without self-assurance and the belief that that brings, achievement is much less likely. So what builds self-assurance? Well, I want to take three aspects of building self-assurance this morning and talk to you about each one in turn. And the first one is simply this: repetition, repetition, repetition. Now, this is a constant theme that runs through all aspects of intellectual character and something that we keep going back to. Hard work is rewarded. The more you practice, the better you'll get, and the more self-assured you'll become. I'll give you an example of something I feel confident with, and of course many of you would anticipate this. That's physics teaching. I've been teaching physics a long time, and I've done it in lots of different ways to lots of different children. It's something I feel confident about, and so I have self-assurance. But then I want to give you an example of something that I feel less confident about. And this happened just last week. And Mrs. Jackson and Mr. Dearden came to see me in my office and said, would you do the introduction to a virtual tour of the school? And this would be for prospective parents who would come and do a virtual tour of the school, including the headmaster's welcome. And they simply wanted me to film in my office saying, hello, welcome to King Henry VIII School, as if I would with a normal parent. I thought it would be easy. But of course it wasn't. Being in front of the camera without a script, even just saying a line or two, made me very uncomfortable. It took us a while to do it and a few number of takes as well. Of course, that was something that I wasn't self-assured about. And that virtual tour will go on our website before too much longer. You can make your own mind up as to whether I got any better than I'm describing now. And of course, at the minute, we're all having to do a good many things that we haven't had time to practice. We're having to start to live life in a very different way. This doesn't help with self-assurance, and that brings me on to the second thing I wanted to talk to you about this morning. Don't listen to negative self-talk. We all have an inner voice that will talk to us, and this voice can be louder and more active when you're doing something new or you're feeling vulnerable. And I would suggest that we're all feeling a little bit vulnerable at the minute. And this voice can be negative. It can talk you out of doing things. It can convince you not to start something. The fear of failure isn't worth the risk. Well, don't listen to this inner voice when it's being negative. It can cripple aspiration. Some people are better at being positive than others, of course. And I give you as an example Muhammad Ali, who was very famous for saying that he was the greatest, constantly telling himself, telling everybody that would listen that he was the greatest. I'm the greatest, he would say. And he was almost convincing everybody of that fact as he was speaking to them. Another example might be Jose Mourinho, who famously told everybody that he was the special one, the manager that was above all of the other managers. And that might contrast a little bit with the fictional character of Eeyore at the other end of the spectrum from the Winnie the Pooh stories, who famously had a constant inner negative voice. I think this inner negative voice is louder amongst teenagers than other age groups that we might come across. So if I give you as an example, if I went into a class of 3-year-olds, perhaps down at Swallows, and asked them, who is the best singer, or who is the best footballer, or who is the best at maths, I would guarantee you that most, if not all of the class would be desperate to put their hands up and explain to me, proclaim to me that they were the best. If I were to do the same with a bunch of teenagers, a year 8 or a year 9 class, and go into that classroom and say, who's the best footballer, who is the best guitar player, whoever that might be, who's the fastest runner, then nobody would put their hands up. I would encourage you to choose the things that you're good at. Remind yourself that you're good at them. Tell your inner voice to talk to you about those positive things and remind you, as I say, that you're good at them. You might not always have been good at them, but you tried, you've practiced. I wasn't always good at physics. In fact, I remember when I was at school looking at my physics teacher and thinking, wow, he must be so clever, he can do all of these physics questions so quickly. And really he's not using very complicated physics. I understand the physics, but the application of it was much more fast for him. And of course it was just because he was more experienced. Similarly with children that I teach now. I don't have any more ability than they do, simply just greater experience. It also says, I also want to explain to you that it tends to be the better you are at something, the greater responsibility you have. But the more people will then start to criticize you for the decisions that you make. I'm mindful over the last week that I've not always got things right. I've had to make some tough choices in uncertain times. And I've had to work really hard to limit my own inner negative voice and be self-assured and positive for everybody's benefit. And I'd like to say thank you to all those who have made the time to say thank you to me for all the efforts that I've made in the last week or so. So the third aspect of self-assurance I wanted to talk to you about was being yourself. Don't try to be somebody that you're not. You can only really be self-assured when you're being true to yourself and who you are. And it begs the question, of course, then, that who are you? The simplest and most complex question to ask of somebody, I'm sure you'll agree. When I'm dealing with teenagers, there tends to be three versions of themselves that they present to me. Who they are in front of their friends, who these people are in front of their parents and adults, their teachers, and thirdly, most importantly, who they are in their own minds, who they are truly within themselves. And when I speak to teenagers in my office, it tends to be for quite extreme reasons, good or bad. There are too many of you, unfortunately, to speak more frequently with, and I'd like to do that, but it can be challenging. But it's not until when I'm speaking to teenagers, I speak to the last of these versions of someone, that any progress is made. It's not until I speak to who they really are and we get to the bottom of that. Helping young adults to understand and shape who they really are is one of the most rewarding bits of my job. Teenagers can often feel out of control as they search for greater independence and freedom, but still have to follow the rules that other people dictate to them. And that uncertainty can lead to insecurity, which provokes the need to be liked. And that changes the version of who you are. And that can be debilitating. Self-assured people frequently ask themselves, who do I think I am? Who do I want to be? Particularly when they're feeling vulnerable. And most of us are feeling a little bit of that vulnerability at the minute. Even when you're thinking who you are in your own mind, there can be a range of answers, of course, depending on current circumstances. The spectrum might be at one end somebody with big ego who feels very confident, and at the other end somebody with greater humility. Not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Even within this range of possibilities of who you are, certain fundamentals stay with us throughout life. I remember when I was at junior school, I got sent home when I was very young for hitting a boy on the head with a xylophone beater. Seems aggressive, and it was. I shouldn't have done it. But what I was actually trying to do was to stop him from being mean to some of my friends. That's the fundamental value of who I was at that time, who I am now, not the violence that was used to undergo that. It's important in current circumstances that we have confidence, self-assurance at these times of uncertainty and show our true selves. And this self-assurance comes through these three things, which I'll stress to you again now. Hard work, not listening to the negative self-talk, and being the best versions of ourselves that we can be. Thank you for listening.